Hi, in the previous video we have discussed about the life cycle of a servlet and we'll discuss some of the life cycle methods, but we haven't touched the coding part. So in this section, let's write some code and we'll understand how exactly the servlet object will be created and servlet object will be destroyed, and we'll understand when actually we have to override the life cycle methods. So let's get started. I'm using the same application that we have created in previous videos. So I'm inside the first servlet class. Let me override the constructor first. First servlet, and inside this I'm gonna call super method, and I will print a message saying that inside the no argument constructor, and I will override the init method. Type init and press Ctrl spacebar. It will display the available methods. There are two methods actually: init, which does not take any parameters, and init, which will take a servlet config as a parameter. We will discuss about these two methods in the future videos, but now override the first method, which does not take any parameters. Let me remove these comments, and I'm gonna print a message inside the init method, and I'm gonna override service method, and this will take two arguments: HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. Gonna remove comments. I'm gonna print a message saying that inside the service method, and finally I'm gonna override destroy method. Inside the destroy method. Save this. So the question is, when we will override this init method? 99% of the time we don't override init method, but in your application, if you want to register a drivers or if you want to get the database connection, then inside this init method we will do that. So this will be called before sending any request to the server. So this will be called as soon as the object will be created. So if you want to take a database connection or if you want to register any drivers to the application, inside this init method we will do that. So this will be called only once in the entire life cycle of a servlet. So the next thing is service method. Again, the service method we should not override because we always picks up the superclass implementation. So if you go to the HTTP servlet implementation, press Ctrl and click on this class, it will take you to the implementation of the HTTP servlet. Here you can see all the methods which are available. Press Ctrl O and type service, and you can see we will always picks up the superclass implementation. So here the container will pass the Java objects, which is a HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. So now the service method will call the get method on this request object to get the HTTP method. So depending upon the HTTP method, the do get or do post method will be called. If the method is a get, then it will call do get method. If the method is a head, then the do head method will be called. If a method is a post, then the do post method will be called. If method is a put, then the do put method will be called. So we don't worry about the service method. We always worry about the do get or do post method. Our job is to override do get or do post method. The service method will always picks the implementation from superclass, and that will call the do get or do post method. So we should not override the service method. So that is why here I'm calling the superclass service method. So that will take care of the do get and do post method. And finally the destroy method. Again, we should not override this destroy method most of the times, but in your application, if you want to free up the resources, like if you want to free up the database resources, then we will call the destroy method, and inside this destroy method we will free up those resources. Again, 99% of the times we don't override the destroy method. We will override only the doGet or doPost method, and everything will take care by the superclass implementation. So let's save this and right click on the project, click on run as, run on server, click finish. Alright, the application is up and running. So I'll go to the console and I'll clear the console because I want to see the messages that are going to print. Still the object is not yet created. When we make a first request, the object will be created. I'm gonna type Bhushan Sirgur. When I click the submit button, if you go to the console, you can see first the constructor will be called, the servlet object will be created by calling a no constructor argument. As soon as the constructor is created, as soon as the constructor is called, a init method will be called. This will be called only once in the entire life cycle of a servlet, right? So the init method will be called as soon as the object is created. As soon as the init method is called, a service method will be called. This service method will be called each time when we make a request. So let's try it out. Let me remove this and I will hit the request again and I will enter the first name, and when you click this submit, let me click the submit button. If you go to the console, you can see again the service method will be called. It will not call the init method or it will not call the constructor method because object will be created only once and the init method will be called only once. When we make a request, the service method will be called and the service method will be taken care. The service method will be called the doGet or doPost method. So inside the doGet method, we haven't write any messages, so it will not print. So finally, the destroy method. So destroy method will be called, as I said, just before shutting down the application or just before shutting down the container, the destroy method will be called. So let me do one thing. Let me print one more message inside the init method. Inside the init method and press Control save, and if you see in the console, the destroy method will be called inside the destroy method. So if you make any changes, so automatically in the servlet, automatically the container or the application will get shut down. So just before shutting down the application, the destroy method will be called. So in your application, if you are a code, like if you want to free up the resources, if you want to free up the JDBC connection, then you can write inside the destroy method. So this is how the servlet object will be created and servlet object will be destroyed. As soon as we send a request, a servlet object will be created by calling a no constructor argument, and as soon as the constructor is called, init method will be called and the service method will be called back with the init method. The service method will be called each time when we make a request, and the service method will call the doGet or doPost method. We should not override the service method. It will always picks up the superclass implementation, and that will taken care of the calling the doGet or doPost method. Our job is to override the doGet or doPost method. And the destroy method, if you want to free up any resources, then we will write inside the destroy method. So this is the life cycle of a servlet. We understood that when actually the servlet object will be created and when actually the servlet class will be destroyed, and when we have to override the servlet lifecycle methods. If we override, what kind of code we can write, all we understood in this lecture. So in the next video, let's dive deeper into these HTTP requests and we'll understand what will happen when we make a 2 or more requests at the same time. That we will see in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.